Hello and welcome to New Compass Collectibles YouTube channel. This is going to be our first set of auction results to look at for the channel, so we're going to be looking at Comic Link's focused auction from March 2024. We're going to look at the overall statistics from the auction and highlight some of the top sales, look at some of the trends in the underlying data, and there's a lot to look at, so let's get started. As I mentioned, this is going to be our first look at auction data and our first look at Comic Link data, which is exciting because Comic Link doesn't save a lot of their auction data like other platforms might. So you can't go back and review previous auctions, see the historical data. It doesn't get pulled into GPA. So there's a lot of data from Comic Link. They're a very big auction house, but they don't make that data public, or it doesn't persist for very long. Once the auction is over, I don't know how long it is, but that auction data gets removed from the website, and it's very hard to go back and reference in the future. So I'm hoping to make more of these videos about Comic Link auctions just to provide a snapshot and give us some historical record of the sales that were happening in the Comic Link auctions at the time. So let's go ahead and get started with some of the slides I have prepared here. This is going to be a sort of dense review of data and some statistics. So it's not going to be for everybody. I understand that, but certainly let me know what you do find helpful, what you like to see in the data. What did you find interesting? What do you think I could spend more time looking at more deeply? What do you think I should skip next time? We're going to have to iterate as I go through the data on some of these auction results, and hopefully we can improve what we're presenting here so that it's helpful for everybody. Okay, so here are the auction totals from Comic Link's March auctions. I should note here that we're only looking at graded comic book sales. So most of the books, I think maybe all of them from Comic Link auctions were graded. I don't actually remember if they sell raw comic books, but if they do, it's not many. And this includes both CGCS slabs and CBCS slabs. The reason for doing graded only is it's just the easiest to compare to GPA sales data. Like if you're doing a data analysis, having a standard grading system and certified grades just makes doing comparisons from auction to auction a little bit easier. If you're looking at raw books, someone might grade something a 4.0, but is it really a 4.0? It depends on the grader. If you have a good grader that's accurate and you can trust them, then yeah, that's a fair comparison, and it might sell for close to a graded book. But if something's under or overgraded, that's just more subjective. So it's easier to look at the graded only books and do the comparisons that way. So for this Comic Link data, we have 8,227 sales of graded books, separated into 5 different sessions. So the way Comic Link sells their auctions, it's broken into 5 sessions, spread out over like a 3 or 4 week period. These Comic Link auctions go for a long time. The first session is session 1A, which is the more premium, like high value books. Session 1B are usually desirable keys as well, but they're a little bit of a tier below the 1A session. Session 2, I believe, is Golden Age only. And session 3 and 4, I'm not sure exactly how they define it. It's a little bit of a grab bag, and there's a lot of books in those sales. So just looking at the chart on the left, this is the average, the total value per session. So session 1A, you can see that bar, it's labeled 154. There were 154 items total on session 1A, but it sold for $800,000. So $800,000 over only 154 items. That brings you to the chart on the right. It's $5,546 average per item sold in session 1A. So the totals on the left are the totals for the entire session. The chart on the right is the average sale per item in each session. Session 1B had 1,700 items, $600,000 total value, but that comes out to $357 average sale per item. Session 2, which is the Golden Age auction, had an average of $307 per item, 698 items in that session, and that brings a total of $200,000 in transaction value. Session 3 and Session 4, if you look at the chart on the right, again, this is the average value per item. So $110 to $107 for Session 3 and Session 4 transactions. That's why I don't focus on Session 3 and Session 4 as much when I'm a buyer, because there's almost 6,000 items between those two sessions. There were 3,613 items in Session 3, 2,058 items in Session 4. That's just way too many auction items for me to look at to decide if there's something I'm interested in buying, unless there's like a very specific book that I'm looking for, and I'll just search for it. And if it's in those sessions, I'll follow it. But otherwise, it's just way too much to look at. And that's not to say that there aren't good books to find there, even though the average value is quite low. There were some expensive books and like important keys in those sessions as well. Just checking my notes on those. It looks like in Session 3, the most expensive book that was sold in Session 3 was a Star Wars 1 9.8, which sold for $3,700. I don't know if that's high or low. But Amazing Spider-Man 300, there was a 9.8 for $2,550, and that is low. So that may just be because it was sold in this Session 3 Comic Link auction. It got lost amongst 3,000 other listings, and if you weren't really paying attention to it, it may not have attracted enough buyers, and so you might have gotten a good deal on that book. So there is one reason to pay attention to these focused auctions, and especially the later sessions, but there's just so many listings. Another interesting book from Session 3 was Evil Ernie #1. There was a 9.8, and that's a scarce book for that time period. $3,479. There was also a New Mutants 98 9.8 that sold for $2,500. That was probably a newsstand, I'm guessing, based on the price. Unfortunately, we can't pull up these listings to actually look at the books or verify what was sold, because I don't have the links to any of those items. In Session 4, there were, again, major keys in those listings. So Session 4 had an ASM 1 1.0, a Tales of Suspense 39 2.0, an ASM 300 9.8 again, sold for $2,760, so higher than the Session 3 sale of $2,550. There was Incredible Hulk 181 5.5, a Silver Surfer 1 8.5. So these are all, books in the $2,000 to $4,000 range, and you could have found them in Session 4, but again, you would have had to been looking amongst the other like 2,000 items that were listed for auction in that session. So this next chart is grouping all of the items in the auction and then showing them by age. So ignoring what session that they were sold in, just grouping all the data by age. And the definition here in terms of platinum, golden, silver age, bronze age, modern age, I'm taking that from Heritage. There's variations in terms of how people define when one age ends and another one begins, but Heritage has a definition that they use. All of their items are categorized based on the publication year. So I used the same range, the same definitions that Heritage uses to categorize the Comic Link sales data, just to be consistent. I don't remember the years offhand, but if you look at the Heritage listings, they break it out in terms of golden, silver, bronze, modern, and platinum ages, and they have the ages defined by certain publication years. So we're using that same definition here. The Golden Age had 545 total transactions, and Silver Age, Bronze Age, and Modern Age had roughly the same number of items, surprisingly. So Silver, Bronze, and Modern were all kind of equally represented in this auction overall, with 1,807, 1,699, and then 1,979 total auction items, respectively. The chart on the right is showing the average selling price per age. So of the 545 sales in the Golden Age, the average selling price was 200 and call it 70 or so dollars, 275, 280 for the Golden Age. The average transaction value went down for silver, bronze, and modern ages. The average Silver Age book sold for about $120. The average Bronze Age book sold for a little under $100, and then the average modern book sold for, it looks like, close to $75. Now again, these are going to be kind of heavily skewed by the Session 3 and Session 4 results, I think, because there are just so many items in those Session 3 and Session 4 auctions, and there tend to be lower priced and more modern books. So the averages of the modern and the bronze books might come down because of that. Now these are the top 5 sales in each age. So I think it's interesting to kind of have a record here of what the top 5 sales are in modern, bronze, silver, and golden age. Again, since the Comic Link sales don't get pulled into GPA and we kind of lose sight of them, they don't really show up on the website, they don't show up in GPA. This is at least one place that we can capture some of the top sales so that we can have them on record if we ever want to go back and reference a book that sold at a Comic Link auction in the past. For the modern books, Ultimate Fallout 4 had a high-grade newsstand. Newsstands don't come up that often, but a 9.6 sold here for $4,651. Edge of the Spider-Verse 2. This was the variant copy, sold in a 9.8 for $3,700. Again, that Evil Ernie one that we talked about earlier sold for $34.79. So that's an example of a book that sold in one of the later sessions, but it still was one of the most expensive modern books sold in the entire auction. So interesting to note that. ASM 300 had a 9.8 sell for $29.25. So that looks like at least the third copy of ASM 300 that we saw in a 9.8 in this auction. The Session 3 sale went for $25.50. The Session 4 sale, I think, went for $27.25 maybe. And then there was a copy at some point that sold for even more, $29.25. So quite a range of values for the ASM 300, which goes to show that if you're looking for that book or any book that sells frequently, make sure you keep an eye out for a good deal and don't be tempted to just overpay because it's available. You can always find another copy, and you can try to find a good deal somewhere. Walking Dead 1 rounds out the top 5 for the 9.8, selling for $28.69. That's the last modern book on this list. If we look at the top 5 Bronze Age sales, going to be a lot of familiar names here, but interesting that there were a lot of 9.8s of some of the popular keys in this auction. So Incredible Hulk 181 had a 9.8 sell for $61,000. Werewolf by Night 32 had a 9.8 sale for $34,300. X-Men 94 9.8 sold for $23,750. The Incredible Hulk 180 and a 9.8 sold for $22,000. And the Werewolf by Night 1 9.8 sold for $11,250. Now I didn't take the time, unfortunately, to look up the most recent sales or like a 90-day average of these books. In the future videos, I may do that. I think that's useful when we're looking at prices of sales data, that we actually have something to compare to. I think that would be more interesting. I kind of ran out of time putting all this data together. But in the future, that is something I'd like to do. The Silver Age books, again, some of the most popular keys here. AF-15 shows up twice, 4.0 and a 3.0, both selling for close to $10,000 per point. An ASM-1 7.5, $33,500. Tales of Suspense 39, 7.5, a high-grade copy of that book for $33,000. So interesting to see there that ASM-1 and Tales of Suspense 39, both in the same grade, sold for roughly the same price. I don't know if that is typical or if that holds true across other grades, but that's interesting to note. And an Incredible Hulk 1 5.0 sold for $26,819. Now the Golden Age books here, I think, are going to be interesting because they will vary more from week to week or month to month, auction to auction, depending on what's available in that auction. The Golden Age listings are going to be different because they are more scarce than a lot of the bronze, silver, and modern books. So depending on what's in any given auction, we're going to see these titles probably vary quite a bit. But the top selling in this auction was Tomb of Terror 15 in a 6.5, sold for $8,100. Also interesting to note that the number one sale from the Golden Age was still lower in value than all of the top 5 Bronze Age books and all of the top 5 Silver Age books. So relatively, there weren't any super high grade, scarce, in-demand Golden Age books in this auction. I don't know if Comic Link is very successful or known for Golden Age books. It'll be interesting to see in future Comic Link auctions if they have a lot of high-grade, desirable Golden Age keys. But in this particular auction, it didn't really seem like there was much of note. I mean, obviously, these are still going for a few $1,000s, so it's not like they're cheap. But compared to the Bronze and Silver Age books that were on offer here, it's really not as expensive as I would have expected. So Batman 3, Batman 9 showing up in the top 5. Exciting Comics 28. That's actually one I'm not familiar with. So it'd be interesting to look that one up and know why that went for so much. Not an issue and not a title that I'm really familiar with. So I'm curious to hear if anyone owns that or can tell me why that one's such a popular book or went for so much money in this particular auction. I'll look it up after, certainly. Marvel Mystery Comics 21 also made the top 5. And interestingly, this is the only CBCS slab in the entire list. I just make a note that this is CBCS here because there's discussion about whether CGC or CBCS slabs sell for the same amount of money. That's a topic for a future video. I do want to compare raw books versus CBCS books versus CGC books. It'll be easier to do the CGC versus CBCS comparison, so I might just do that on its own in a future video. But I just want to make that note here so that it's clear what we're looking at with these sales figures. This next chart is interesting, and it may not vary too much month to month. It shows how many issues of a particular title were for sale in this auction. So we know that Amazing Spider-Man is quite popular. I didn't expect it to be this popular. So out of the close to 8,000 items in the auction, over 1,000 of these were Amazing Spider-Man titles or Amazing Spider-Man slabs. So that's over 10% of all of the items in the Comic Link auction were ASM issues. It was kind of wild. X-Men, Batman, Avengers, Fantastic Four, Incredible Hulk, some of the other titles on the top of this list. I don't know how much variation we'll see in this chart from auction to auction, so if it ends up looking pretty much the same every time, then I might not include it in the future, but for now I wanted to see the breakdown. Now these last few charts are a little more complicated, so let me explain them first. We're going to see a chart here for, again, each age, the modern, bronze, silver, and golden age. And what this is showing is the titles that have the highest average selling price within that age. So I looked at all the books, all the titles per age, and then for books that have more than, I think, a minimum of 5 sales, I just took the average selling price to see which titles are the most valuable in this particular auction. And this is going to be, I think, more interesting for like the silver and golden age when there's a lot more runs being collected. The modern age and the bronze age, it's I think a little more driven just by individual keys. So for example, here we have Batman Adventures is the highest selling average per auction title. For 7 sales in this title, we had an average of close to $1,000 per sale. But that's probably all Batman Adventures number 12, the first appearance of Harley Quinn. Same thing for Ultimate Fallout 4. There's 11 sales of Ultimate Fallout 4 issues. Most of them are probably, maybe all of them were issue number 4, Ultimate Fallout 4, the first appearance of Miles Morales. And the average price was a little over $420. Some other high-value titles were X-Men Annual, Saga of the Swamp Thing, New Mutants, Wolverine Limited Series, Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. Again, these are probably all driven by individual title or individual issues within those titles. The Bronze Age, what really stands out is Giant Size X-Men. Of course, that's because Giant Size X-Men #1 is basically the only issue that gets sold. So all of those sell for pretty high prices whenever they come to market, even though there's quite a few of them. There are 9 sales in this particular auction, and the average selling price was over $1,600. The next highest average sales price was the Werewolf by Night title, then Iron Fist, Hero for Hire, Batman, and Foom. So those were interesting. I wouldn't have expected Werewolf by Night or Iron Fist or Hero for Hire to have high average selling prices. Hero for Hire probably just was the single Hero for Hire #1 driving those average prices. Werewolf by Night, there are a few issues there that are valuable, and Iron Fist, I don't know how many of those issues are valuable or how many of those sales were just the first appearance of Sabretooth, but interesting to see the range of titles here. I think the most interesting will be Silver Age and Golden Age, so let's look at those now. The average selling price was the highest for Iron Man, which was surprising to me. The average Iron Man issue sold for close to $400, and we know that's not just one issue that's selling 66 times. That's a range of issues within the Iron Man run that produces a very high average selling price, close to $400. So that was surprising to me. The next was Silver Surfer with 51 sales and the average selling price being close to $300. Amazing Spider-Man was third. So you know that Amazing Spider-Man is popular. We can see that from the number of sales being over 1,000, but there are also a lot of lower, either lower grade copies or just lesser key slabs that were probably part of this auction. You know, for 1,000 sales, they're not all going to be like mega key, high dollar value books. So all of those lower dollar listings bring the average down to closer to around $260 per issue for Amazing Spider-Man. Some of the other titles here are Iron Man and Submariner, Batman again from, I think we saw that in the previous slide as well, Amazing Spider-Man Annual, Marvel Superheroes, Journey into Mystery, Strange Tales, and Showcase rounds out the top 10 for the Silver Age. Now the Golden Age, again, I think this will be more interesting to see auction to auction what changes we see here. It's not surprising to see Batman and Action Comics have the highest average value. So Batman, 244 sales with an average value of $725 approximately. Action Comics, 70 sales selling for over $600 per issue. And Mysterious Adventures. Now this is another one that surprised me. I'm not familiar with Mysterious Adventures. Maybe if I saw the covers, I would recognize it, but only 5 sales here, and falling just behind Batman and Action Comics is pretty impressive. So just shy of $600 per sale for Mysterious Adventures. That's another one I'm going to look up after recording this video. Crime Suspense Stories and Planet Comics follow that. Those are both very well-known, popular, and collected runs. So Haunted Thrills, Strange Worlds, Fight Against Crime, Detective Comics, and Wings Comics are the last of our top 10 in the Golden Age. Wings Comics is another interesting one to me. Only 7 sales, but this is a very World War II focused fiction house publication, and not as often collected anymore. Sort of that World War II era, like World War II fighting combat style cover is not as sought after in like the superhero generation. But the more people look at Golden Age comics, those fiction house titles like Rangers Comics and Wings Comics, they have a lot of really great covers. A lot of good girl art content on some of those covers as well. So they are collected by a portion of the community, and they do hold some good value. At least some of the covers do. So you can see that here in this data with almost $300 per issue for those 7 sales. But that's it for today and this Comic Link focused auction from March 2024. And I found a lot of this data interesting. I hope you did too. If you did, please go ahead and tell me what you liked about it, what you would like to see more of, and what we would like to maybe not see as much anymore if there were any things that were confusing or you didn't find very helpful, any insights you'd like to see me dig a little more deeper into. I'd love to hear all that feedback in the comments below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and share the channel with other people that you think would appreciate it as well. I'd love to see the audience grow here so we can have some conversation in the comments about this sales data.